I don't feel that grass-fed is entirely what they say it is.
So it's technically more unenvironmentally friendly to raise grass-fed completely its entire life.
Right. It's something to really think about, and something that even proves, even more so than we already knew, that the media is not always right.
Today, we are talking about a topic that affects what ends up on our plates, the deceptive marketing tactics behind meat labels, and the difference between grass-fed beef versus grain-fed beef. We are joined by an animal nutritionist and farmer, Ashlyn Clemmer.
Definitely want to continue growing, but they're going to grow a lot slower.
I'm sure you've seen these labels before, but there are some misconceptions on these labels as to how these animals are raised. And these labels don't make the meat nutritionally or environmentally superior. The internet and social media have revolutionized the way we purchase meat, particularly benefiting direct-to-consumer meat companies, where consumers are increasingly seeking freezer beef. However, these same companies are also spreading and exaggerating misinformation about meat, which confuses the consumer. Welcome to Food for Thought, where we discuss food topics from a unique food science perspective, exploring subjects you may have never considered before.
What is the difference between grass-fed versus grain-fed?
So grass-fed beef is strictly only fed a grass diet, so that's going to be hay and just green grass. Grain-fed beef is typically, almost always, is never going to be a completely grain diet throughout its entire life. So that's usually going to be what we would technically, in correct terms, consider a grass-fed, grain-finished beef. So they are fed grass until they're weaned, and then potentially grass and hay as well, until they go to a backgrounder or feedlot, and they are only fed grain between 80 and 300 days prior to harvest. So that's not exactly a grain-fed beef. That's, I feel, kind of mislabeled. So that is primarily what all these cattle that the beef that you see in the grocery store, that's kind of the process that they go through, unless they have the grass-fed label on the package.
Okay, so the grain-fed is pretty much just grain at the end of its diet. They're always eating grass though, because whenever you go past a farm, you're always seeing a cow eating grass no matter what. You can't even control it, and they live on grass. There's no way that they're just eating grains.
So cattle cannot eat only grain throughout its entire life. That's like you or I eating Mexican 3 meals a day. Our stomachs are not going to like that. It's a very rich feed, so they need some sort of fiber and forage to just kind of like make that a more balanced diet for them. So regardless if they are getting grain or not, they're always going to have hay, free choice as well, so they can eat that at their leisure, and then that really helps keep their stomachs happy as well.
So do you guys feed your cattle grain or grass?
So we strictly only do what would be considered grass-fed. Our cattle, when we go to sell our calves, those are the ones that will be sold for a profit each year. Those actually will go to a backgrounder or feedlot once they're sold, and then from there they will probably be given grain as they get closer to their time of being harvested. So we do not put any grain into their diet ourselves. So at this point they could be marketed as grass-fed. They're at least 600 pounds, so they'll be slaughtered around 14 to 1,800 pounds. So they have lived quite a while without receiving any grain in their diet. So it's basically used as a finishing factor to improve the amount of marbling in the meat. Marbling is super important in terms of just overall palatability of the meat. That's the internal fat inside the meat that you see. So that just allows for it to be tastier, more tender, all those things that you're looking for when you eat a piece of meat. That's what marbling allows for. So it's really critical to have that in your meat. That's why people really see grass-fed as not really desirable, because without that internal fat in the meat, it makes it a really tough piece of meat, and it doesn't have much flavor and has a very different taste than the cattle that have been fed grain.
So interesting, because I always thought it was the opposite. As a consumer, you think that grass-fed is better than like grain-fed as far as taste as well. But my last experience with grass-fed beef did not live up to that, and I was like, wait a minute, I should have just gotten the regular meat at the store.
On my left is grass-fed, and as you can see, it's leaner, and it takes half the time of cooking it.
I definitely feel it's a niche market. It's something that it works well for people that have health risks that need to go that route, but overall it's not a product that people really are craving.
What are the grains made out of that you don't feed them, but like other people are feeding them? What are those grains made out of?
So a large portion of finishing grain diets that we see are comprised of corn. All of these ingredients that we use in these different types of rations that formulate grain is things that we consume ourselves. So that can be everything from wheat, barley, oats, corn, soybeans, cottonseed hulls, just as a source of fiber. Those sorts of things are really what comprise most of the grain that you're going to see that we're going to be feeding cattle. And it's just on what's available in your area. That's what's available for us in Virginia. And that's probably going to change as you move to different states. There's North Carolina, they feed a lot of produce to their cattle as they feed them out. So it is really cool how we do that. And then in particular, North Carolina, they use a lot of produce. That's produce that they weren't able to sell to the consumer. So it's just
like
us being
upcycled, essentially.
We are very sustainable. This is a very sustainable industry.
Do you think grain-fed versus grass-fed impacts the environment more than one or the other?
Grass-fed is actually the one that has more impact on our environment over, utilizing grain in the diet. That's because it takes a much longer amount of time to finish a calf out off of just grass, because there's not a lot of high fat and energy content in that grass. With the grain, that allows them to develop and condition quicker, so that's going to be adding on fat and muscle, so they're able to essentially accelerate that growth. So them being able to grow faster allows them to have less time to put an impact on our environment. So overall, utilizing grain is actually better in the large scheme of things on our environment, which is pretty neat.
Now that we know what grass-fed is, what is the difference between grass-fed versus grass-finished?
The grass-fed, I consider that of just like overall fed grass. Grass-finished, usually that's something that goes hand in hand with grass-fed. So they're basically trying to convey that they have not received grain throughout their entire diet, which is basically something that a consumer that's trying to get a leaner cut of meat is going to prefer, and they're going to like to see that labeling. So that's what they're kind of trying to do, and the sort of consumers are trying to target with that sort of labeling. So they're definitely going to continue growing, but they're going to grow a lot slower. We need to give them as much as they're going to be willing to eat, but if we're, as people, only being fed like bread and water, we're probably not going to develop as much as someone that's fed meat and vegetables and bread and water and just have access to all those good protein components. So basically that's the reasoning behind all of it. Grass just does not have the same nutrition as grain does. So it's going to allow them to just develop quicker on grain, and just it's going to be a little bit slower with the grass.
Okay, but eventually they'll all get the same nutrients at the end of their life cycle, or not really?
It's not that they're getting the same nutrition, but they're going to meet the same end goal,
Okay.
the end result, but not at the same rate.
So it's technically more unenvironmentally friendly to raise grass-fed completely its entire life.
Right. They're able to make an impact longer.
Now you know. Now you know. See, this is like the conversations that we need to have. It's like we think, we see grass-fed like, oh, more sustainable, more environmentally friendly, but really it's not, because you're keeping it on land longer.
Right.
More carbon footprint, I'm guessing.
Exactly. So it's something to really think about, and something that even proves, even more so than we already knew, that the media is not always right. So do your homework. Talk to other people other than the media to formulate your own opinions. It's really important.
My accountant, she was raising one cow, just one, and she treated him so well. She fed him everything, and she said it cost her like $5,000 a year just to feed the cow. And then she also said to slaughter the cow, it was like a 2-year waiting list.
Yep.
And then to kill the cow, like the actual price of killing the cow, I think she said it was like a couple grand or something. I can't remember how much. And I'm like, okay, so how long do you have a cow for? And I mean, I guess it depends how long you feed the cow for.
Yeah, it does.
How much percentage of the industry is grass-fed versus grain-fed?
So grass-fed, strictly grass-fed beef only equates to 5% of total beef production. So it's definitely a niche market. We're only seeing a small percentage of grass-fed beef, although it is, media portrays that it's a lot more. It's just not in consumer demand because of, it's just overall not as great of a eating experience in terms of its tenderness, juiciness, overall palatability, and everything that goes with it. It just overall tastes completely different and much more improved when grain is added to the diet. Overall, they're going to be happier, and then you're going to just have a better quality piece of meat. So you'll see like prime meat or choice. So those are grades of meat. Prime is going to be your highest quality that the certified Angus beef or whatever sets on these carcasses. So adding grain to the diet is a huge component in being able to grade higher and better. And grading higher and better gives you more money once you get them to the point of being on a rail.
So how deceptive do you think the grass-fed marketing is?
So grass-fed, like we said, is a niche market, only being 5% of total beef production in the nation. I've done research regarding just overall benefits of grass-fed versus cattle that have had grain in their diets prior to harvest, and you seeing that in the grocery store. And most of the marketing behind grass-fed beef is points that it's healthier, it's better for you. It's just overall going to provide less health risk if you want to add red meat to your diet. Through the research that I have conducted, there are no benefits to grass-fed over grain-fed. Both of them have their pros and cons overall, and it's just ultimately consumer preference. There is nothing that says one is better than the other. Overall, both of them are going to have their goods and bads. Wagyu is a beef breed. They are basically notorious for their marbling content in their meat because it's a lot more than your Angus or just overall general cut of meat when it comes to the beef world. So they are highly popular and have a nice price tag on those cuts from those breeds of cattle. but they actually are known to have more omega-3 in the meat. So they're actually, although it has more marbling in it, still has more better things that are better for you. So that meat contains more oleic acid, which is what is allowing LDL cholesterol to be decreased and boosting that HDL cholesterol. So the more oleic acid, the better it is for you, and that goes hand in hand with that intramuscular fat. So we have a lot of marbling in that meat. With that marbling, you would think that it would be not as good for you as grass-fed beef. But through research done, they determined that this fat had a lot more monounsaturated fats in it, or fatty acids, which are good for you. So that includes basically things that reduce LDL cholesterol, which is bad. It promotes HDL cholesterol, which is good for you. So those are things that are going to decrease your chances of heart attacks and strokes. And the amount of basically monounsaturated fatty acids in these meats, so Wagyu being the most marbling in the meat, so has more fat in it, had the highest amount of those fatty acids in it. And then the second being grain-fed regular Angus cattle. So the least amount was grass-fed. I think it was around 32%, versus like 40% with a Wagyu cut of meat. So that was really interesting, how much health benefits are involved in meat that has more marbling in it. So it's very deceptive what the grass-fed market is trying to say. There's a lot more benefits than you would think, probably maybe different than grass-fed, but still great benefits to eating just meat that is not marketed as grass-fed. So I don't feel that grass-fed is entirely what they say it is. Yeah, so I do know in Japan, this is like off the beaten path, but they will feed like Wagyu cattle wine like every day and give them massages for the best meat. So
What?
yeah, so they will feed them wine. So that's a whole nother marketing technique, and that we see in foreign countries. But yeah, they say that promotes the flavor and quality of the meat by doing that.
It goes to show how stress-free handling really
Yes.
makes your meat taste good, and that's like the biggest incentive.
Yeah, so some days you probably wish you were a Wagyu cow in Japan.